you're an author and an ex-spy, aren't you?
I am.
Right, he is. We have the real James Bond here with us. He is here to tell us about his books.
My first book.
Right, just to make it clear, these are Andy's books, right?
Born in London, moved out to Hertfordshire, went to Rickmansworth Grammar School, quite unsuccessful there. I left the day I was 16. I wouldn't say under a black cloud, it was against my parents' wishes, it was against the school's wishes, but I saw no point in carrying on with school. So I announced that I was going to leave the day I was old enough, which was in those days 16. I was told I had to inform all my teachers, so I went round to all my teachers to tell them that I was leaving. Some were upset. One particular teacher said, "Andy, that's the best thing you've done since you got here," and so on. So then I went to see the headmaster and said, "Okay, I've done everything I'm supposed to, I'm off now." And he said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "Probably go and work with my father. He was just starting a printing business, so I'll go and work with him." And he said, "Well, have you ever thought about working for your government?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I said, "Well, I'm open to all offers. What are you talking about?" He said, I'll write to you shortly." And a few weeks later, I had a letter from the British Intelligence Service, SIS, more commonly you'll know it as MI6. I was 16, absolutely green. I'd never written a cheque before, I'd never been to a restaurant before, I'd never travelled abroad before, so the offer was quite interesting.
I bet it was for a 16-year-old.
So yes, I went to interviews in London. It's all in the book. It explains everything, how it all happened. Some of it's quite funny, some very funny events in there, and I ended up being accepted and going off to spy school. And some interesting events happened there as well, which one or two stories in the book. And then I started work, having no clue whatsoever what I'm supposed to do. And I believe I was a bit of an experiment, because normally these kind of people come from Oxbridge, that kind of type of person, you know, with degrees and so on. And I was the first person ever, and probably still, as far as I can find out, totally unqualified at the age of 16. So I am what they made me.
You're one of a kind.
I believe so.
Right.
So I started work with no clue what I was supposed to do, and I went to see...
What was the training like? Because you just glanced over the training, but I'm like...
Well, most of it's
right,
quite...
what's Spying 101? Spying Chapter 1?
Most of it's quite boring, actually.
Is it sitting down, or is it a lot of sporty
it's
type
everything.
and
It's mostly,
shooting and stuff like that?
Mostly learning the process. I can't really talk too much about most of it.
Just tell us what you can
you face exams and various tests.
So you have to be brainy, basically.
One that I'll
clever.
recall to you, because it's in the book, and I know it's safe to tell you. This was down in Portsmouth, where you are faced with some of the practical aspects. So in most of the schools is where you learn to do all the paperwork, but Gosport is where you do some of the practical stuff, learn how to follow people, avoid following people, that kind of stuff. One of the tests, everyone in the class was given a task that they had to complete. So it might be something like, you have to go and get a complete stranger's passport number, and you have to figure out a way of doing that. And I know it's safe to say this because it's in somebody else's book.
Right.
So for instance, he was given the task of getting the passport number of a complete stranger. So he went in and sat in a bar. Portsmouth and Gosport is a big sailing area, and people are always looking to crew on boats. So he sat in a pub and saw some girls and said, look, I'm going across to France this weekend. I'm looking for crew, are you interested? And this is how sailing works. And they said, yes, okay, we'd love to have a crew for you. And he said, okay, for the purpose of the marina in France, I need your passport number, and so on. It's quite simple and quite clever. That's how you have to think. So my task was slightly different. I was always different. I had to plant something blue on a member of my class, which sounds easy until you think about it, because the whole class knows this, so they're expecting me to come along and try and plant something blue, and I had a week to complete the task. So I thought about it, and everybody went about their tasks, avoiding me, making sure they got nowhere near me, and I came up with a plan. And on the day of revealing the results of our tests, it came round to me, my turn to reveal how I'd done the task and whether I succeeded. And before they got to me, actually, we all went off for a coffee, and everybody avoided me. No one wanted to sit with me at the table. So I said, look, okay guys, I realise you avoided me. I'll make you all the coffees and you sit down, I'll bring you all the coffee. And so I did all the coffees and went back to the class after the tea break, and they said, okay Andy, how have you completed your task? Have you managed it? I said, yes. They said, okay, who have you planted something blue on in the class? And I said, this guy here. I said, and the guy was like, what have you done? And I said, and that guy there. And that, in fact, all of you, including you, I said to the tutor. And I said, I've planted something blue on all of you. And they're all, well, what have you done? I said, when I made the coffees, I put a chemical in it was basically a dye, in your coffees, and you'll all be peeing bright blue tomorrow.
Did you become an adrenaline junkie after 17 years of spying?
No, my career ended because I was in Angola, trying to find out, the Russians weren't supposed to be there, the Cubans were there, and we knew the Russians obviously are supplying hardware and so on, and my job was to, disguised as part of a UN mission, there was the UN AVEM, and this was AVEM 1, there were 3 in the end that ended the war. In fact, the war hasn't ended, but I was AVEM 1, which actually failed, and I went out into the field with a team of UN people. I was posing as a Spanish colonel, and so I had to learn very fluent Spanish in 3 weeks to cover, because the British weren't involved in the AVEMs, so I had to get there somehow. The UK team put me in place, and I went out into the field with this team of people, and occasionally I'd wander off by myself to try and find out what Russian equipment was there, and that's when I got caught being somewhere, looking somewhere where I shouldn't be. And to my surprise, the Russians were expecting me. I was caught by this Russian guy.
Why am I not surprised?
Which we had suffered several moles in the service, and the fact that they knew I was coming told me there was another mole in the service that told them I was there, and they knew exactly where I would be.
Just a small caveat. Before we started shooting, you told me that you think that at the time you were recruited, one of the main reasons they recruited somebody outside the usual pool was because they had too many moles in the department.
Yes.
Do you think that's something that happens in every single secret service around the world?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've recruited them so as agents. I was an officer, Most people think of people like me being an agent, but actually I'm an officer and I run agents. So my job normally is quite safe because I get the agents to do the dirty work.
You said you were an officer,
yes,
and not an agent on the street. You ran agents, and you know they were doing the work,
yes,
and you were basically just handling them. Well, you were a handler basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. This is the only thing that I got from reading all sorts of books about spies. So, what's the risk involved? Or what's the difference between the risk of an agent being on the street and you being the handler or the guy in the office?
Because they're obviously acting against their country. So even in Britain, I think you can still be executed for being a traitor, I believe. Maybe
right,
they've changed it now, I don't know. Yes, it is considerable risk. My main area of concern, I had several areas of concern, some I'm not going to talk about, but the one I can talk about, because everyone will know, is the Philippines. I had agents informing me of the Marcoses, President Marcos. Maybe everybody knows how his career ended, but he went into exile, taking with him millions in money and jewellery. You probably remember his wife, Imelda Marcos. It was discovered she had about 2,000 pairs of shoes and so on. Corruption from an extremely poor country. When you go there, it's shocking how poor people live. And I had 7 agents there, and I think the one reason they were loyal to me is because I absolutely promised them that whatever happened, I would look after them for the rest of their lives, and I do. I still, even today, if they have any problems, I'll help them out, and I'll never ever let that slide.
You have to protect your sources, and you have to protect
absolutely,
them from, obviously, secrecy is a big key of that.
I no longer work for them, but I will still protect them if they ask for my help. That kind of thing. I'll never let them down.
Right. So back to you being in Angola, and basically that was the end of your career. That was the moment when you thought, right, I got out of this alive. I need to get out of this.
I wasn't going to get out of it alive. They took me in custody and interrogated me quite severely, tortured me, beat me up quite severely. It didn't help myself when I discovered the room that I was in. There was no lock on the door. There was only a guard outside the door, and it didn't really help myself when I just opened the door a bit to have a look outside. Because it was quite dark in the room, and they rushed in and gave me another beating, sat me down at a small table a bit like this one, and actually nailed my hands to the table, and that's not a very interesting experience that I would want to go through again. Eventually they realised there wasn't much they were getting from me, so they ordered these 2 Angolans to march me off into the woods and shoot me, and stood me against a tree, and at that point I decided, right, I'm going to die here unless I do something. I'll do anything. So I literally, my hands were tied behind my back, and these people are always drunk, they're always drugged up, they hadn't done the job properly, and I felt this rope becoming looser and I could get my hands out. So I just pushed against the tree and ran straight at these guys, ran straight past them while they were having a fag. They weren't ready, so it caught them a bit by surprise, and I just kept running, and I ran and ran all the way back to where the rest of the UN party had been camped. I'd got back there, and because I'd been missing for several days, found them gone without me, which is very nice of them. Anyway, the owner of the house whose garden we were camping in, which was quite a safe area to camp because he had a garden wall and he was a really nice guy.
When you say camp, were you in tents or
Yes,
something?
we were in tents.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were out in the field. Most of the rest of the UN were based around airfields, so they had proper, it's in the book, they had proper, almost like towns themselves, these villages where there was hospitals and air conditioning.
Proper encampments.
But we were out in the field, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Go out in the field and look around a bit. We were way on the east side of the country. It was a long way, it's about 700 miles. So I ran through these guys and they weren't ready. By the time they'd got their guns, swung around and started firing at me, I'm already 30 yards, 40 yards away with trees between me and them. They started firing at me and I just kept running. One bullet did come right between my arm and my body, went through my shirt, and I've got a scar under here where one bullet literally burnt me rather than, it was more of a graze. Mm-hmm. And the dirt I had on me at the time is more like a tattoo now. I've got this dirt tattoo from Angola under here.
There you go, carry a bit of Angola with you.
Yeah. So I ran back to this house, found my team was gone, and what had spooked the Russians was this small light aircraft had arrived at the airfield where we were camped just outside. And this UNITA base was. That had spooked them. This aeroplane was actually the diamond buyer. The guy's house that we were staying in, he was a diamond miner. He was such a lovely guy, Angolan. And got back to his house where this diamond buyer was in his house and they were doing their dealing. And I said, look, I need to get out of here quick. And I was told, okay, go to the airfield, try and get into his aeroplane and wait for him. They'll finish their business, he'll come and fly me out. So I escaped out of the house just as this UNITA mob were arriving, went over the back wall and got into the airfield, sneaked onto the aeroplane. He'd given me the keys because it was locked, it was all fully fueled. Given me the keys, and just as I got into the plane, to hide in the plane, I heard shooting start in his house, which was only literally 200 meters away, and I heard the shooting. I thought, well, that's it, I need to just fly out of here. Now, I'd had 4 hours experience of flying lessons, no license, no nothing, but I just thought I just need to go. So I started the plane, took off and flew out, and as I took off, I actually witnessed the people in the house being shot and the diamond buyer being shot, and so then I'm faced with a task. Well, now I've taken off, I'm up in the air, and no nothing, no maps, no nothing, and I've got a 700-mile journey to fly. So I decided the base where the UN team were heading back for was probably about, from memory, it was about 300 miles away. I decided to head for that, stayed low for a bit, and then climbed up to about 3,500 feet, and just from memory set the compass on a trajectory towards this city. And because of my experience, at some stage I fell asleep while actually flying this plane at 3,500 feet and missed the city completely. When, by the time my senses came back, I realised the city was now an hour behind me. Do I turn around? Am I totally lost? I don't know where I am. I'm up in the air. So I decided to keep going the rest of the 700 miles, and I literally worked out in my head that I had just enough fuel to make it. If the wind was against me, I wouldn't have made it. Keep going, get to the coast where I knew I would find Luanda and the main airfield, which is where the main kind of camp was for the UN. And I arrived there just as the engine
was starting to splutter.
Contacted them on emergency frequency and said, look, I'm in distress. I need guidance how to land this thing. And they took me down, and then I landed quite successfully, first time. First solo flight after 4 hours flying experience. And
you got out of there alive.
I'm very careful not to expose any secrets. The first book is just about me, how I got started, how I got established, and how the career ended, and then goes on like a second half, if you like, what I've done since.
Right. Did you have to actually send this information or this book to be okayed by the MI6, or you just thought, right, this is what has been written so far by people like me who worked for the government?
No, I just wrote it.
So what was your map? When you put the information down, what was your...
Well, my plan was,
your plan.
I'll explain why I wrote the book. As an officer, I had a secretary, and the secretary, Karen, was the most amazing person in the world. She was stunningly beautiful. I loved her to bits. And in 2014, I was, after I left the service, because I came back from Angola with PTSD and I wasn't fit to serve, so I left and came to Devon. That's when I moved to Devon. I bought a small business here and had no contact with anyone for quite a while. But in 2014 I had a text message while I was on holiday in Spain. I was sitting in the garden of the villa and had a text message that basically said Karen had died from cancer, and I was extremely upset, and I just burst into tears, you know, and here I am in a beautiful place in the sun by the pool, and my wife just said, what's up, you know, you should be happy, not sitting there blubbing your eyes out. And I eventually managed to explain to her what had happened, and she had no clue whatsoever what I'd done. No one in my family or friends had any clue whatsoever what I did. The only person that knew what I did was my father. And so I started telling people, and just nobody would believe me. And I found that difficult to cope with too. I had all kinds of problems, and that was difficult for me to cope with, that I couldn't convince people to believe me. So I thought the only way to do this is to write it down as a complete story. So I wrote the first book, which is basically the story of my career and kind of what I've done since and how I've coped with that, because the trauma never stopped. There were, you know, I had a business and there was trauma in that as well. So the bombardment never stopped coming at me. And then people read that and they were so enthralled. So many people have said, is there going to be another book? I can't wait. So I thought, yeah, I need to write another book. It's a completely different story. Obviously, the story of my life is known. So now this is like one particular operation and how it came about completely by accident. And it's an operation that could have stopped the Falklands War from happening. But actually, the part about that operation is literally probably 10 pages. The rest of it is how that came about in the first place. What happened, and it was completely by accident.
And this is the moment when you tell us how much of these books is actually true and how much is, I don't know, trying to hide the truth. I'm very curious.
Obviously,
because you can only say so much, and you had to pick your words and choose the events, and obviously. So how much of this is true? Because both of them are based on real stories.
Yes.
This is what's the amazing bit. Both books are based on the experiences of a real spy working for the British government, and he had to write these books to basically keep his sanity and make sure he's a functional human being, and that's basically his therapy. So how much of this is true?
It's all true.
And how much of it is avoiding the truth?
No, it's all true. Obviously, there's a lot I can't say. There's places and locations I can't talk about.
I should think so, yeah.
But the story's all true. I will be honest and say the ending of the first book is true, but in the book it happened in, how the book ends is happened in 2018. But the actual truth of that is it happened 25 years ago. And the reason for that is I wrote the book, sent it off to the editor, and I was told the story must have an end. When you write or tell a story, it has to have a beginning, a middle and an end. And it had no end. And I said, well, there is no end because it's still ongoing actually. And I said, no, we need you to find a way of ending the book. So
give some closure.
The only way I could end it with closure was to move this story that happened 25 years ago to 2018. And so everything's true, it's just the chronological order of it is changed by that one story.
Andy, once again, thank you very much for agreeing to sit down and tell your story, and thank you very much for bringing the books along. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you
very much.